One of our journalists, Peter Grester, has been freed from prison after 400 days behind bars, and he is in good health. He was arrested.
The jailing of the three Al Jazeera journalists was an egregious miscarriage of justice, a smack in the face of press freedom by a nasty regime. Just today, the prominent blogger and activist Alaa Abd el-Fattah was jailed for 5 years simply for being present at an anti-government demonstration. Since the military coup 18 months ago ousted the democratically elected Muslim Brotherhood, Egypt's new masters have rounded up tens of thousands of alleged Brotherhood members and sentenced 1,500 to death. An equal number have been killed in street violence, and journalists covering all this have themselves been injured or killed, and many of them locked up, among them the Al-Jaz Three. But the story behind the headlines of how and why they were jailed in the first place is not so clear-cut. Al Jazeera, bankrolled by the Emir of Qatar, is accused of taking sides in Egypt's political crisis, doing his bidding by backing the new regime's sworn enemy.
Bulldozers are clearing the streets in Rabat.
Numerous serving and former staff have told Channel 4 News they believe the network's allegiance to the banned Muslim Brotherhood left Al Jazeera journalists hopelessly exposed at a time when the authorities were brutally cracking down on press freedom. We have seen emails sent by reporting staff to their bosses in Qatar complaining of this. These were ignored. Mohammed Fahmy, the most outspoken of the three, said they'd been hung out to dry, victims of a Cold War between Egypt and Qatar.
They got caught in a bigger political game that they probably had no idea they were walking into.
Egyptians believe Al Jazeera is the stick with which Qatar beats Egypt. It's a big TV station for such a tiny country.
What is your answer to the Egyptian allegation that Al Jazeera allowed itself to become a propaganda wing of Qatari foreign policy?
One word: rubbish.
Qatar is a tiny speck of a country whose people happen to be the richest on earth.
Qatar is the new kid on the block, and it's got swagger. Its phenomenal gas wealth has bought it a seat at the world's top table. Investments in cities such as London involve breathtaking property portfolios, including the Shard. It's got the World Cup. Politically, they're muscling in with the heavyweights, and in the international media, Qatar has taken on the big guns too, with Al Jazeera.
The 24-hour network boasts multiple channels in Arabic and other languages. Al Jazeera's English language report stood out from other international coverage of the 2011 Tahrir Square protests.
Thousands of people are still gathered in a famous Tahrir Square in downtown Cairo.
Al Jazeera Egypt Live was a dedicated Arabic language station. It took a pro-Muslim Brotherhood editorial line as it covered the Islamist party's meteoric accession to power. But when in 2013 revolution turned to counter-revolution, Egypt Live found itself in a bind.
It was very dangerous for everyone operating there, and the pressures came from all directions. But it was always a bit different for Al Jazeera. The level of hostility among the people of Egypt towards Al Jazeera's correspondents was increasingly off the scale.
The perceived editorial bias of Al Jazeera's two Arabic news channels had tarred the English language news reports with the same brush, however impartial its journalists tried to be. Egyptian journalist Mohamed Sabri says Qatar's policies placed Al Jazeera right at the heart of it.
I believe Al Jazeera has taken sides in this dispute and has become a player in it by giving a platform for the Muslim Brotherhood, an exclusive platform for the Muslim Brotherhood, waging attacks against the rivals of the Muslim Brotherhood within the Egyptian regime when they were in power, and the ones who ousted the Muslim Brotherhood in 2013.
Channel 4 News has spoken to more than a dozen current and former Al Jazeera correspondents and other senior editorial staff who did stints in Egypt over the past 4 years. We've chosen to protect their identities. All spoke of their manager's cavalier approach to journalists' safety. of working in what one called a Kafkaesque world, in which decisions on the ground were undermined by directions from Qatar. A senior former correspondent told me, "I felt I'd been sent in not as a journalist, but as a martyr."
These communities have been
Anita McNaught was the only former Al Jazeera correspondent willing to be interviewed on camera. She covered Egypt in 2011 and did 2 more lengthy stints in 2013.
There's never been any acknowledgement by Al Jazeera management or editorial in public that Al Jazeera as a television channel got sucked in to the Muslim Brotherhood game that was being played out in the Middle East. Everyone working at Al Jazeera English, came to recognise that Al Jazeera's pro-Muslim Brotherhood bias in some of its reporting, in some of the areas in which it worked, put its staff in greater and unnecessary danger.
As popular and political sentiment towards Al Jazeera soured due to perceptions of imbalance, Al Jazeera management in Qatar received repeated warnings from its own journalists on the ground, from lawyers, from security advisors, even from senior foreign diplomat, that its teams in Cairo were in danger. Even when a crew was detained for several days, the channel continued to order rolling deployments of crews through Cairo. It was a chronicle of a raid foretold, and it finally happened a year ago in the Marriott Hotel down there.
A pro-regime TV channel broadcast footage of the hotel raid on what they branded the Marriott cell. Al Jazeera bureau chief Mohammed Fahmy opened the door to the police. They'd been operating from a hotel since the bureau was raided and shut down. Set to the sinister soundtrack of a sci-fi action movie called Thor: The Dark World, the pictures showed a room strewn with computers, notebooks and cameras. Peter Grester, the Australian correspondent, was clearly alarmed.
Find someone who can interpret for me.
Bahar Mohammed, an Egyptian national, was arrested at his home. All 3, though, were presented as part of a terrorist conspiracy. Channel 4 News has learned that just days before Peter Grester's deployment, Al Jazeera's own head of security had advised the director of news against deploying any further teams to Egypt on the grounds that it was too dangerous.
Do you feel that, looking back now, that you did everything in your power to protect those journalists?
Absolutely, yes.
But there were warnings, weren't there?
Let's put that in perspective, really. We are not asking our journalists or forcing them to report anywhere. Who warned us? There is no concrete evidence that someone told us, don't work in Egypt. Never happened.
Well, I mean, I understand that there was a diplomatic warning saying that there was a prospect of your bureau being closed down at one point.
Can I interrupt you for a minute?
Certainly.
Because that line of questioning is really dangerous. I don't want to continue this line. Al Jazeera is not under trial now.
The allegation about you, sir, in particular, is that you knowingly put some of your staff over several years
I'm sorry,
into harm's way.
I'm not going to take allegations and throwing allegations and then I deny and people will say, yes, he's denying.
You are accused
now
of
you're
allowing
doing the same thing again. I'm not going to answer that.
But I can't deal with the specifics if you don't want to deal with the specifics.
You are dealing with the specifics about the conduct of Al Jazeera. I want to concentrate on freeing our people.
Salah Negm conceded that Egypt was indeed a dangerous place to report from, but he insisted all necessary precautions had been taken.
A detail as small as these plastic rulers.
By September 2013, reports by correspondents on Al Jazeera English were being translated into Arabic and rerun on Al Jazeera Egypt Live. The network's Egyptian channel was perceived by many as being pro-Muslim Brotherhood, and by then had already been outlawed by the military regime. Channel 4 News has seen emails which show that the Al Jazeera English bureau in Cairo was growing gravely concerned by the regime's increasingly repressive stance towards the media and repeatedly warned their bosses in Qatar. Bureau Chief Mohammed Fahmy wrote to the Director of News, Salah Negm, warning, "This action may come back to bite us." Salah Negm replied, "I will handle this. Thank you for alerting me." Egypt Live continued to broadcast the reports. These rebroadcasts were produced as prosecution evidence and helped convict the 3 journalists. Witness after witness failed to distinguish between the Arabic and English language channels. Human rights groups and lawyers across the world condemned the trial as a farce. But the plight of the 3 defendants was made even worse when Al Jazeera filed a $150 million compensation claim against the Egyptian government right in the middle of their trial.
Did Al Jazeera management adhere to the code of ethics which they expect their own journalists to observe?
No, at times I don't believe they did. For a while there, it was the channel that everyone had to watch. Somewhere along the way, it became a channel that people began to disparage as having an agenda, as being biased, as no longer being neutral. And Al Jazeera English cannot address the issue of the safety of its staff without addressing the issue of the neutrality of its journalism. And that's what it's got to come back and do.
Egypt remains riven by strife. Journalists are still in jail. Alleged Brotherhood members are still being sentenced to death, and all forms of protest are mercilessly suppressed. There was a brief thaw in relations between Egypt and Qatar after Al Jazeera finally shut down its Egypt Live channel and Qatar expelled exiled Muslim Brotherhood members. But it didn't last long. Last week, Doha recalled its ambassador in a dispute over Egyptian airstrikes in Libya. If, as many believe, the Al Jaz 3 were made to pay the political price for an undeclared war between Cairo and Qatar, the upstart little Gulf state has perhaps had its wings clipped. And Al Jazeera, the big channel that came to define it, once heralded as a brave new voice in global broadcasting, has had its fingers burned. Badly.
Jonathan Miller reporting, and Al Jazeera has issued a statement to Channel 4 News saying Al Jazeera denies receiving warnings from any diplomat that their bureau in Cairo was under threat of closure and denies that their head of security advised against further deployment to Egypt. Al Jazeera reflects all sides of the political divide in Egypt, and our presence has greatly improved coverage in Egypt and the region. Our Egypt Live channel used material from a variety of sources.